on this episode of the Contagious Influencers of America podcast.
You know, I was out on these two-way dirt roads out in Nashville, outside of Nashville, and it was pouring down rain, and I just felt my car start to veer over the center line. And I was very aware of what I was allowing to happen. And I saw a pair of headlights way down the road coming toward me, and I just had this moment where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. This isn't living. And about that time, I hear my phone buzz again. It's in the front seat, and I looked down.
So who was on the other end of that phone call? Well, we're going to find out today. This is the kind of story you're going to want to hear the rest of. I'm David Sams, your host of CIA, Contagious Influences of America, the podcast from the producers of Keep the Faith. This is somebody that you've probably seen online. This is somebody that has over 500 million views on Facebook, approaching 5 million followers, eclipsing 65 million YouTube views, and has several number one selling albums along with her husband. I'm talking about Kelsey Grimm. She is one half of the YouTube music duo Caleb+Kelsey, along with her husband Caleb. Now, Kelsey gets, she's going to get really raw with us as she talks about struggling with insecurity, trying to live up to worldly expectations, and being a domestic abuse survivor. Now, this gets very real, very raw, so I'm just giving you a heads up on this. And this is all in her new book called Over It, now in stores and, of course, on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. And we talk about her favorite job, being a stay-at-home mom, and how that works, and her music career with her husband. So Kelsey Grimm's my guest today. But first, I don't know about you, but the prices of food and fuel and homes, they've gone through the roof all around the country right now. But amazingly, mortgage rates are still incredibly low. How long will it last? Well, that's the million-dollar question, of course. If a cash refinance or home purchase is in your plans, the clock is ticking. Why not give our friends at Fellowship Home Loans a call at 800-804-SAVE. That's 800-804-7283. And put interest rates in a time out. You can also find them at fellowshiphomeloans.com. Now, you can save on your monthly payment, take cash out to reduce debt, or maybe even shorten your term. The Fellowship Home Loan team will take time to listen to you and help you live the dream for less. They listen, they hear, and they care. Again, call 800-804-SAVE or find them at fellowshiphomeloans.com. Intercontinental Capital Group, DBA Fellowship Home Loans, Equal Housing Opportunity Lender, NMLS number 60134. That's a mouthful. Let's get to that interview that I recently did with Kelsey Grimm, and she's going to talk about her book, Over It, and she's also going to reveal who was on the other end of that phone line. Hey, Kelsey, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Absolutely. You know, first of all, I just got to ask you, how do you classify yourself? I mean, are you an artist? Are you an author? I know you're all of the above, but
I think probably most people would know me as an artist with my husband Caleb and our duo Caleb+Kelsey.
Yeah.
That's like the thing that kind of put us on the map.
Well, not only put you on the map, it sort of is the map. So let's go back to that, and then I want to go back further. But tell me about this whole YouTube thing.
Yeah. So Caleb and I, we met back in 2012, and at the time he was in a boy band and I was in a girl band, and we were both signed to the same label at some point in time. And we started singing together just kind of for fun. That's, always kind of the way it starts. And then we got married, and it became kind of something that we pursued a little bit more seriously. Again, it was still for fun, but we were like, maybe there's something here. Let's just kind of walk down this road until it doesn't make sense anymore. And so we released a worship song. It was a brilliant mashup between two really big songs at the time that Caleb and a friend of his arranged, and we put it on the internet one night, went to bed, and we had woken up the next morning and it had gone viral overnight. And so that was kind of the first time that any of our music really got out there. And again, I think that was in maybe 13 or 14, probably 2014. And we've been going ever since.
So when you said that you guys were artists at a label, and he was with a boy band and you were with a girl group, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. What was that journey like? First of all, did you come to Nashville for that purpose?
Yeah. So for me, Caleb was already here. He moved here to Nashville about 11 years ago, and he signed to a label here in town with a boy band. And eventually they moved on from the label. They're totally independent now. They actually still are a thing. They're Anthem Lights, if you're familiar with them. But for me and my story, it was an auditioned group. It was a girl group, and I had heard about it through a local radio station back in Illinois. And they were kind of told to find talent, and they knew of me. I did some local competitions and things like that. And so they reached out to me and said, we heard about this group that they're putting together in Nashville. We think you fit the bill. It'd be perfect, and you should audition. And I was like, well, I just graduated from college. I just started a low-level job. I may as well go for it. Let's just try. So I came and I auditioned. I made the group and moved here 6 weeks later. And I was in a girl group for about a year and a half. And then got married and wanted to have babies and get off the road. So I quit.
So at that point, were you just giving up that artist dream?
In some ways, I think I was. Yeah, maybe subconsciously. We traveled a lot in the girl band, and I think for me, I just realized that living out on the road was not what I wanted. It's not the lifestyle that I wanted. I'm a homebody, and I really, really deeply wanted to be a mom. And so shortly after Caleb and I got married, about a year into our marriage, we decided we wanted to start a family, and so we did. And so for us, we've kind of fallen into this amazing thing. Caleb's created this business model that allows us to stay home. So we're not touring all the time. And even pre-COVID, we were not touring all the time. We basically just put out content and we stream, and, music sales can give us the best of both worlds. We can do music and also stay home with our kids.
So you're kind of living the dream.
It feels like it. Yeah, it really does. It feels like we stumbled into something really amazing. So
you have millions of views now on tens of millions of views, right?
Yeah,
on YouTube.
That's what they tell me.
And you have like 5+ million
Facebook followers. Yeah.
Facebook followers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make you nervous?
Yeah. I mean, it happened really fast. It was like when that one worship mashup kind of went viral and crazy. We made a whole record of that kind of a thing because people were really impacted by it, and we could tell, right from the jump, that it was connecting with people. And so we made a whole album of this, and once that album came out, it went to #1 in the first week of release, and it happened really fast. Our following grew overnight, and yeah, it was a little bit overwhelming, I'll be honest.
So when you say it was #1, where was it #1?
On the iTunes charts.
Wow.
Yeah, for the Christian category.
And you've had several since then.
Yeah, several #1 albums, and it's been a wild ride for sure.
So do you record these things at home?
We do now. Yeah. So we actually this was an accident as well. We moved into a home here in town and decided that we wanted to put a studio in upstairs so that we could work from home. And the studio finished. It was literally done, I think, the month before the world really shut down for COVID. So we were able to still work from home and continue recording music and putting it out. And yeah, we work upstairs now. It's really, really great. We're super blessed to have work be in the confines of our home. It makes going back and forth between upstairs and downstairs with the kids and stuff a little easier.
So other than falling in love with you two once you were exposed to folks, why do you think they gravitated to this in the first place? Was it because they were covers and they were looking for these songs?
I think they were two at the time when it first kind of started to take off. It was really big worship songs of the time. Like this was several years ago now. But the first two we ever did, we mashed up the song Oceans with You Make Me Brave. And it was just a really beautiful arrangement and very simplified. Like we just did our voices with a piano. And I think people liked the kind of broken down version version. And just marrying those two songs felt really good. And so, and I think that, you know, those songs made a huge impact on people's hearts, and, it made sense to us to put them together. And when we did, it just it took off from there. There isn't anything super special, I don't think, about what we necessarily did with them, but, people seem to think otherwise. So we've gotten an amazing response, for a lot of our music, but we're finding that the worship stuff really, really is what is moving people. Really cool to see.
So what's it like working with your husband?
It's funny. I get that question a lot, actually, and I never know how to answer it.
Well, I notice he's not here, by the way.
He's not here, so no, it's great. It really is. We work well together. He's kind of the brains of the operation. He is more the creative mind of the two of us. And so he does a lot of the writing, the arranging. And I just kind of show up and sing when I'm told. It is a really good balance, because I don't have time or energy to kind of step into the, you know, the writing music world. So it works out.
Well, you're a mother of 3 too. Yes. How old are they?
They are 1, 3, and 4.
Oh, okay. You really have your hands full.
We're really tired, but it's great. It's the best kind of tired.
Are you going to break them all into the act at some point?
Oh gosh, I don't know. If they're interested, if they start to show some interest, we, you know, of course. But right now they're in sports and gymnastics and just kind of, you know, being wild and free, and it's a good spot for them.
So what has this whole experience taught you about just putting yourself out there? Because I know, a lot of folks do the online thing, the YouTube thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people are afraid to do it. And a lot of people are just sort of just stuck.
Yeah.
You know, they've been around town here for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. What advice would you give somebody about just getting past the fear and doing something unique?
Well, I think the question, what it boiled down to for me, you know, auditioning for the girl group, was I'll always wonder. If I don't do it, if I don't try, I will always wonder what could have been. And I don't live well with that. I always kind of have tended to be a person that puts myself out there. And so I know for some personalities, it's a little bit easier, but for the people listening who are like, man, I'm scared. We're all scared. You know, you're not alone. Sometimes you just gotta dig your heels in and say, I'm not doing this for anybody but me. And so, you know, if it hits really hard and people really connect with it, then that's awesome. That's a bonus. But you got to do it for yourself. You got to do it because you believe in it. So my encouragement would just be to stay the course.
I want to talk about your book because first of all, I have to tell you, these publishers never send me the book until like the day I interview. It's like, oh yeah, like I have the morning to
listen to it or read it.
But I actually decided, you know what, I'm going to go listen to your audiobook.
Great.
I listened to about an hour and a half of it,
okay.
And it was really good. I love it when the author actually takes time to do their own book.
Yeah.
I hate it when they don't. It's like, really?
Yeah, I felt like it was so important for it to be me reading it. You know, I want people to hear my voice and know that it was important for me to be telling my own story, you know?
So the book is called Over It. And why did you decide to write a book called Over It?
Yeah, so it's a culmination of a whole lot of things. It's a story of redemption, right? It's my story. I grew up a pastor's kid. And so from a very, very young age, I understood, even if the messages were subliminal or unspoken, that there was a very specific thing that I needed to be and a way that I needed to show up in the world. And that oftentimes felt like perfection to me. People expected me as a pastor's kid to be perfect, or at least to look like I was perfect and had it all together. And so at a really young age, I think that what I started to believe about myself was that I was not allowed to be a mess. Like there was no part of me that could be not put together. And ultimately it led me to a really horrific, traumatic place in college. And I found myself in an abusive relationship with a man who claimed to love me and treated me terribly and abused me in all the ways, sexually, psychologically, emotionally. And there was a lot of trauma that I had to deal with. several years after I got out of that relationship. And so, I think my reason for writing is for a couple different reasons, to be honest. I want to share my story because what I have learned along the way is that the more open and honest and vulnerable that I have been, the more open and honest and vulnerable people, particularly women, have been in response to it. They feel like they're not alone. They're seen, they're heard. And that matters. That, I hate that I lived so much of my life in quiet darkness because I didn't feel like I could be fully known and loved in that place. And so my hope is that by sharing my story, it gives other women the courage to do the same. And also, at the end of the day, my hope and prayer for this book is that when people read it, they see a real person. That I put myself out there, when 10 years ago, I would have sat across the table from you and refused to tell you any part of my story because I was so full of shame, and I was so afraid of what people would think of me or how will it change the way that people view me. But the reality is we're all a mess, in some ways. And if we could get honest about that and open and understand that we're loved even in that space, I think it would really set a lot of people free. So, my hope is that when people read this book, they would feel empowered to share their stories, to know that they're not alone, and to know that you are already loved right where you are today. Whether, your life is in a horrible place and you feel like you don't know where your next step is or how you're going to wake up the next day. Like, you are not alone. And that is my heart behind this book. The world tells us to be a whole lot of different things. And even if you didn't grow up as a pastor's kid and under kind of that spotlight, with those kinds of expectations pushed on you, I think that if you hold up your little cell phone, each and every one of us, we're scrolling through the expectations today. It is very clear and obvious what the world wants us to be. It tells us what to eat and how to present ourselves and what to wear and what our weight should be and how we should look and what things we're allowed to say and what things we're allowed to feel. And I just want to shatter those. To be fully transparent, I want to say that we, as God's people, his children, we are already innately loved and enough because we belong to him. The end. That's it. So I'm very passionate about this because I have children of my own now, and I have a daughter. That I'm trying to raise in today's culture and society of, where perfection is the expectation. And I want her to grow up knowing that she is beloved by God and she is enough because she belongs to him, period. So that's my hope when people read this book, that they would feel and know the same about themselves, that they are fiercely and recklessly loved by a God who created them for a purpose.
Well, I am a pastor's kid, and, I've had a great life. My parents are great. And, but I know that kind of pressure you're talking about.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, what happened that made you feel safe enough to be able to write this book?
That's a good question. I think part of it was time, letting some time elapse before I was able to write it all down. But most importantly, I think there's a huge stigma around counseling, and I'm not sure why. I think that we all, if we're really honest, we all have things that we need to work through, and we could all benefit from getting some help. And that's what I did. When I hit rock bottom, and when I say rock bottom, I faced a suicidal night on a bridge here in Nashville. That was rock bottom for me. And a phone call, divinely timed by my dad, saved my life that night. And the very next day, I walked into the office of a counselor, and I had never been in counseling before, but I knew I wasn't going to live to tell another day if I didn't get some help. And so that's what I did. And I spent weeks and months and, now years in counseling and working through it with a professional, and just knowing that I'm not alone. The things that I went through, there are other people like me, and there are other people like us who have gone through some pretty horrific things, but if you get somebody to help you work through them and work through the past trauma, there really is healing to be found on the other side of it. So I'm an advocate for that.
We have such a similar story. I lived very much the same situation. And as a matter of fact, one of the big changes that I have made and I've talked about here several times is over the past year and a half, I've done over 200 hours of therapy.
Amazing.
It was a life-changing, it still is.
Absolutely.
Every day. And I had to tell you, last year I started walking at the top of the pandemic. And right before that, I really had a major meltdown. And I started walking. I started 3 miles a day, then 5. Now I'm up to 7. But
wow,
I did 1,500 miles last year. And this year, my goal was to walk from Nashville to the Santa Monica Pier in 1 year.
Oh my goodness.
Which is exactly 2,021 miles in 2021. And that was, the goal was to do that by this December 31st.
Okay.
I just reached that goal last week.
Wow, I have chills. That's amazing.
I hit 2050, so now I'm going for the New York to LA this year.
Wow.
So I've got 3 more months. So.
Oh my word, that's so inspiring. Good for you.
But it was the therapy that really got me on that path.
Yes, absolutely. I think, it's funny growing up as a pastor's kid and in conservative kind of evangelical culture, I do feel like the stigma still exists. Although I feel like we're moving in the right direction. I do feel like those walls are being broken down. And, some churches that I even know of here locally offer free counseling to their staff. And I think it's so incredible and upstanding of churches to recognize that especially people in the church who hold leadership positions, like we need some help, to deal with the pressure of being, leading people and helping people through, life is difficult. And a lot of times I don't feel like people in leadership positions are equipped to do that because they're not getting help themselves. And so I think it's really admirable when a person can be brave enough. Like, it doesn't make you weak to see and admit that you need a counselor or that you need help. It makes you brave. It makes you strong, And so my encouragement to the people listening to this, if there's things going on in your life that you are not navigating well on your own, please dig deep, find some help. There are people around you that are willing and, would be honored to walk alongside you and whatever it is that you're facing today. It is so important to get help.
We don't talk enough about abuse.
No, we don't, especially in the church.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit because, there are folks listening right now that are going through this.
Yeah.
When did you recognize that that's what you were dealing with, and you weren't overlooking it? You weren't. First of all, why did you stay with this guy?
It's a great question. One of the main questions, to be honest, that I had to work through in counseling. I think there was a systematic breakdown of me once I entered into that relationship. The reality is that because I didn't know who I was going into that relationship, I was bending to the will of everyone around me. I just was shaping myself into who I felt like people needed me to be. And I'd done that all my life as a pastor's kid. I just became who I thought people needed me to be. And what happens when we do that is we lose our own inner sense of who we are. We lose our identity. And so when I entered into that relationship with that man, I think it was a really slow fade. I didn't recognize that I was giving away pieces of myself and changing who I was to fit who I felt like he needed me to be or who he wanted me to be. And so I stayed with him because I wanted him to love me. I wanted to feel like I was important to him. And I felt like if I could just become this version of myself that I knew he wanted me to be, he would, in fact, come to love me. And of course, looking back, everything is clear. I see in 2020, things are clearer in the rear view, but at the time, I just didn't recognize what was happening. It was a slow, methodical fade. And he created me to be who he needed me to be. And I just did it because I went into that relationship not knowing who I was.
Who did he want you to be?
I think he wanted me to be quiet and just make him look good. Stand behind him and hold him up. And he didn't want me to have dreams of my own. He didn't want me to get in his way. And, I was just a pretty person for him to tag along and support him as he followed his own dreams. And I, was kind of left on the wayside to, just not fend for myself, but in some ways to fend for myself, and I think.
And you were engaged, right?
We were engaged.
Wow.
Yeah. Looking back, I get really, really sad when I think of the girl who was in that relationship because I don't recognize her anymore. I'm not her anymore. So it's really sometimes still difficult for me to reconcile who I was then with who I am now. The girl I am now wouldn't put up with that for one red hot second,
By the way, I wouldn't put up with the guy I was 2 years ago, so don't feel bad.
Right. Yeah. I hear that 100%. But I think I just started to make small concessions of myself, little bits at a time. And before I knew it and before I recognized it, I was allowing him to take advantage of me in a whole lot of ways. And the abuse, I don't think that I recognized the abuse until I was in counseling. And I can remember telling my story several weeks in to therapy, and my counselor, I remember it so well, sitting in this room, and I looked at the floor, at the same spot on the floor for the entire hour as I told him from start to finish every single thing I had been through in that relationship and what that man did to me and what he said to me and what he made me do behind closed doors. And when I finished telling him all of this, which by the way, was the first time I had ever said out loud to anybody what had happened to me. This was a year and a half after the fact. I looked up from the floor because there was just this long silent pause on his end. And when I looked up, he just had tears. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was just sobbing. And I was a little caught off guard by that. I had just dumped my entire deepest, darkest well of secrets on him for the first time. And there was such a huge part of me at that point in time that believed that what had happened to me was my fault, that I brought it on myself, that I could have stopped it. And I'll never forget what he said to me when he kind of composed himself. A couple minutes later, he was like, "Kelsey, I am so sorry that happened to you. You need to hear someone say that, because if he hasn't apologized, and he may never apologize to you, you need to hear another person say that they are so sorry that happened to you. And secondly, you need to know that it wasn't your fault." Mm-hmm. The reality of that kind of person, that narcissistic person, is that he controlled every aspect of you and did so in a very methodical way and over a long period of time where you didn't recognize what was happening until it was too late. So you say, it was my fault. I chose myself there. I decided myself there. I could have stopped it. I could have said no. He was like, the reality is at that point in time, you could not have said no. Mm-hmm. He had total, complete control over you. And that's true. I mean, he absolutely did. It was only by the grace of God. I mean, that the day that I broke off the engagement, I mean, that was still the most out-of-body experience I have ever had. I do not feel like I was in control of the decision that I made in that moment. I didn't go into that conversation knowing I was going to break up with him. It just happened. And I know that it was the Holy Spirit speaking through me to him and allowing me an exit strategy, And my counselor was right. He had abused me in horrific ways, that some of which I do get into in the book, it took me a very long time to heal from, and I think that healing it's not linear. I think that we hope it is always, but it never is, and the trauma of my past, while I have ultimately found a deep sense of healing from it, I think it's still always going to be a piece of me. There's always going to be a part of me, and a part of that time that made me who I am today, and so I could look back at that season of my life with regret, and I could look back at it. People used to ask me early on when I first started being a little bit more open with the story, people would ask me, so if you could go back and do it all over again, would you? And for a long time, I would say, yes, I would do the whole thing differently. And I would save that poor little girl from what she went through because it was so awful. But where I sit today, a decade after, I don't feel that anymore. I wouldn't change it. That is that horrific story is, yes, it is part of my story, but it didn't end there. That is what is so beautiful about life. I was at this dark, awful, rock bottom place, and God straight up pulled me out, and where I sit today, I wouldn't want to relive it, but I wouldn't go back and change it because I am who I am in part because of what happened then.
So what was the breaking point? When did you hit rock bottom? What happened? So
when I moved to Nashville, which was in August of 2012, I had broken off that engagement in February earlier that year. And I had not told anyone to that point what had happened to me. So when I moved to Nashville, I think what I was hoping for was a brand new start. Nobody knew me here. I could just kind of rewrite my life. That's what I felt like coming in. I was like, I can just turn the page. Nobody knows my story here. Nobody knows what I've been through. Nobody knows my past. It's perfect. It's a perfect opportunity to just hit the refresh button. But if you're listening to this and you've been through trauma in the past, then you know that undealt with trauma catches up with you later. And I didn't deal with it. And so when I moved to Nashville, I had not dealt with what I'd been through yet. And so that new start, that fresh new start that I was so desperate to find upon moving here, didn't happen. I was still this broken shell of a person when I moved here. And when I moved here, I didn't know a soul. I didn't know anyone. I was in a group with 4 other strangers that I'd never met before from 4 other states. And instead of starting over afresh, I found ways of coping with my pain that were unhealthy. I was living this reckless path of destruction, and I found alcohol, and I fell into the wrong crowd, and I partied and I numbed out with whatever I could get my hands on, because at that time in my life, my hurt was so deep that all these ways of numbing it, I discovered kind of just like took the pain away, at least in some way, or at least for very brief moments. And so one night my manager called me, after I had been out all night and, didn't come home. And when I did come home, I reeked of alcohol, and the girls that I was living with at the time called my manager and said, we want her out. She's crazy. She's out of control. And they were not wrong. I mean, I was out of control. And my manager called me and said, Kelsey, this is what the girls are saying. Is it true? And I said, yes, it's true. And he said, well, you have, one of 2 options here. You can pack your bags and you can go home. We can replace you. Or you can go to counseling and you can work through whatever it is that you're masking your pain from right now. And I was like, well, I can't go home. And he was like, well, then I think that you've made your decision, And so for me, rock bottom happened about that same time, to be honest. Like it was coming off of a weekend of binge drinking, and apparently the same time that the girls had called my manager had called my dad and said, hey, I don't know if you guys know what's going on with Kelsey, but she's reckless. She's wild. She's being crazy. She's never coming home at night. And we're worried about her. We're worried that this isn't going to work out with her and that we're going to have you come get her. And my dad, this is the part in the story, man. This is like what I call a movie moment. they're like these moments in our lives that are frozen in time that alter the entire trajectory of where you're headed. You know what I mean? This was that moment. So I'm driving down the weird back roads, very dark. It's storming outside. I mean, like torrential downpour. It's late at night. I'm avoiding going home to the girls because they hated me. I was not welcome there. They were trying to kick me out. And so I was trying to just drive around until I knew they'd all be sleeping so I could just sneak in and go to bed. And my phone rings and it's my dad. And, no one who's listening to this right now knows my dad, but in a quick nutshell, my dad and I have a very special relationship. Always have. We are very close. He's never angry. He has maybe yelled at me 3 times in my entire life, but this night was one of those times. And he called and he said, your manager called me. I know everything. Kelsey, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? You are throwing your life away. This is not who we raised you to be, Kelsey. I'm losing it. Like your mom and I, we can't do this anymore. You are recklessly throwing your life away. And again, he was right. But all of a sudden, I felt like my already small circle of support, my daddy was the last person that I felt like if someone was going to stand in my corner, it would have been him. And that night he became one of the people who were yelling. And I think he hung up on me. And when he did, I had this moment, like this was my rock bottom moment. Every person who had ever loved me, I felt like had no idea the pain that I was living in that moment. And I don't know that this happened consciously, but I was out on these 2-way dirt roads out in Nashville, outside of Nashville, and it was pouring down rain, and I just felt my car start to veer over the center line. And I was very aware of what I was allowing to happen. And I saw a pair of headlights way down the road coming toward me. And I just had this moment where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. This isn't living. And about that time, I hear my phone buzz again. It's in the front seat. And I looked down and it was my dad again. And I almost didn't answer it, but I picked up. And the second time that I picked up, it was like a different person answered. He was sobbing and he was like, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Where are you? Pull over. And I jerked the wheel back over the center line. And, those pair of headlights that I'd seen coming from way down the street passed me. And I couldn't see. I was sobbing. And he was like, pull over, baby, pull over. Where are you? Kelsey, I just want to help you. Help me help you. What is going on? You have to let someone in. And that, to me, that was the lowest point in my story. I recognized in that moment, I almost gave it all away because of how alone I felt, and how desperate I felt. It was the very next morning that I started counseling. And that was, I've already touched on this part of the story, but that was the beginning of a very long, painful road to healing, but one that, very literally saved my life, And so, it's a hard story to share, but
how did you find your counselor?
That's a good question. So, my manager at the time knew of a little organization here in town that the music labels funded him so that all of their artists could see him for free. And my manager reached out to him.
About Al.
I'm talking about Al.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Al Andrews. If you know Al Andrews, he is a very real reason why I'm still sitting here today. And he worked me through all of the trauma of that college relationship, the trauma just of my childhood and, living under this excruciating pressure all the time. And he helped me step into myself for the first time. And it was life-changing. Ultimately, I would not be sitting here if it weren't for him. So how did you pick up the pieces and learn the trust again between at that point and when you met your husband? It was a long road. It took I think first and foremost, it took me recognizing for the first time who I was in Christ, that I was loved, that I was a daughter, and that I had worth and value intrinsically because I belonged to the Creator. And once I started to establish these truths about myself, and I started to regain some semblance of who I was and confidence in myself, I was able to be more confident that I could learn to trust again. And Caleb came into this story. I mean, I was still seeing Al often. Caleb came in at a really kind of a messy time in my healing process, but God's timing is perfect. And, I was able to Caleb was kind of able to walk through my healing with me, like as we dated, because I was still seeing Al, still working through all of this. So he and I kind of worked in real time through all of this. So he knew my story right away.
Did he go to see Al with you?
We did our premarital with Al. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. He was kind of a part of that story from the beginning. And so for us, it was just it was an amazing journey that we almost walked together, like I was working through this trauma of my past for the first time, and Caleb was kind of there, a front row seat to all of it. So, he supported me, lovingly every step of the way. Mm-hmm. And so I just knew at some point in that process that Caleb was going to love me differently, mm-hmm. that he was going to love me well. And he has done that for 8 years now.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for sharing that. And then again, these are things that we don't address enough,
right? Because
on Christian radio, it's safe for the entire family. It's positive, encouraging, right. Blah blah blah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
we really need Christian radio for everybody that's screwed up.
That's exactly right. Say it louder.
I know.
That's what I'm trying to do, though. That's why telling my story is so important to me, because it's necessary. Mm-hmm. The reality is, and this is kind of the worst and the best part, is that my story is not uncommon.
Mm-mm, not at all.
But we're made to believe that it is. And that's why we isolate, and that's why we don't tell anybody, because we think that it only happened to us, and what will people think if they knew, mm-hmm. What does that change how people will see me? And ultimately I got to a place in my life where I'm like, hey, I don't care if it does. It's more important for me to be known, than it is to be known for this idea that people have of me. Like, mm-hmm. I've moved beyond that.
How do you avoid with all the social media stuff? And I have two daughters that just are college graduates. Okay. And one of them loves social media, and she's like a little rock star. And the other one she doesn't even have an account.
She hates it.
She hates it.
Well, I live somewhere in between both of those. I have a love-hate relationship with social media.
With all the expectations these days, as it relates to social media, how do you manage keeping your head on straight?
I wish I had a really concrete, amazing answer for that. The reality is I'm stumbling through it every day, just like everybody else, I think creating boundaries, social media can be a really beautiful uniting place. It can be, there's potential for that. If you are looking for the right things, you can find them. You can find community, you can find people, like-minded people, or people with similar stories and backgrounds. And it can be a really beautiful, fulfilling place if you're looking in the right places. But it can also be the exact opposite of that. It can be a reminder of all of the expectations, the things that you're constantly trying to break free from, and tell yourself that these are lies. Society's telling me that I need to be these things, but I have to remember my identity isn't found there. My identity is found in who I am in Christ, period, the end. So that balance, that delicate balance, it's one I'm still searching for every day. I want to be totally honest. Some days I do a better job than others, but I think allowing ourselves some really, really fierce boundaries around social media, and surrounding yourself with people on social media who make you feel better about yourself, not the other way around. That's important, and not falling into the mindless vortex of scrolling, which we're all guilty of, but it's not a healthy place to be. So there's not a great answer for that question. I wish there were.
No, I know. Hey, it's something that we all deal with every day.
It is.
Now your social media platform right now consists of what? YouTube, Instagram,
Facebook. I mean, all of those platforms, TikTok.
And what is the number one question that you are asked that has nothing to do with your music? Personal question on online. I
feel like one that I get asked a lot as a mom now is, how do I balance it all? And again, I have to be honest. I cannot be anything but honest. I don't balance it all very well, most days. Some days, again, are better than others. I'm just doing the best I can, and I'm taking it a day at a time. Like, there's not a playbook for this. I'm an artist. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. I'm a friend. I'm a daughter. I'm a soon to be aunt. Like, there's all of these hats that I wear. Oh, I'm homeschooling my son, my oldest now. There's all of these hats that I wear and things that I'm doing. And balancing it all does not come easy for me. It is not this equation that I've got figured out. I'm just taking it a day at a time, like everybody else. So, I want to be honest about that. That's probably the most asked question that I get. How do you juggle it all? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm constantly trying to figure that out from other people.
How do you deal with, let's say Caleb comes to you with another idea, and you're like, how do you manage doing this, being married and juggling all these ideas, being sort of entrepreneurial?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It is a beautiful partnership that Caleb and I have. He treats Caleb+Kelsey like a full-time 9-to-5 job. So he works, we've got an office and a studio in our home upstairs, which is amazing. And he works full-time on these brands that we're a part of, and the beautiful reality for me is that I see myself as a stay-at-home mom. Yes, I'm an artist. I do that. That is a part of what I do. But for the most part, he is running the behind the scenes show for Caleb+Kelsey. And truly, I show up to the studio and sing when he tells me to. And, sometimes, very rarely am I a part of the creative process. Every now and again, I will be, if there's time for that. But to be totally forthright, I love Caleb+Kelsey. I love the opportunity to get to create music with my husband and to create something that has had an incredible impact on a lot of people. I am grateful for it. I don't take it lightly. I don't take it for granted, but also my number one priority is being a mother. I am with my kids every single day. I am investing in them. My priority is them. And so my quote unquote 9-to-5 exists in the realm of a mother, and so for me, and Caleb knows that and respects that and wants that for me because he knows that that's my dream. I'm living in my dream as a stay-at-home mom right now. And so he kind of handles all of the creative process and the scheduling and all of that. And he's so patient with me about scheduling things when it makes sense with the kids, and making time for being in the studio and for shoot days and things like this. But when it doesn't encroach on my time with the kids, and so we've got this really beautiful song and dance going right now, that works for us. And we didn't stumble into it. It has been, it's been calculated and tweaked over and over and over the years because we've added, we have 3 kids now. So our schedule is a lot tighter and more packed than it was when we just had Emmett. And so it's just kind of we work around it when we can and we don't stress because ultimately things will get done. Mm-hmm. You can't sweat the small stuff, but we are that balance that everyone talks about. We're still figuring it out.
I got to ask you, when you went through this and your dad, you had those phone calls with your dad, and now here we are years later. How do you think that, how did that impact your relationship with your parents? How did it, because you just put it out there.
I'm not gonna lie. It's been hard with my parents. When I first sat them down and told them everything that had happened in college and in that relationship, it was about 1.5 years, close to 2 years after I'd gotten out of the relationship. I had done several months of counseling with Al, and Al kind of pushed me to tell them, he was like, it's time, Kelsey, like they deserve to know, because they prayed. The reality is, all these years later, I know their story too, of how it all played out. And ultimately, my trauma and what I went through in that season was trauma for them too. They were losing their baby girl, and didn't know why. And so when I told them and was forthright about everything that had happened, that was a step toward each other in a big way, because for the first time in almost 2 years, I was fully known by them, and they knew the reality and the gravity of what happened in that relationship. And so it was really hard. But it was so good. And they were, oh man, as a parent now, I can't fathom how awful it must have been for my mom and dad to hear what I went through. You don't want that for your child. You don't want them to experience that level of hurt and pain. And, I think it's still difficult. Like, it was really difficult for my parents to read the book and to have to relive all of these awful things, and to some degree, I think that as parents, we blame ourselves for what happens to our kids, even when there's absolutely nothing that they could have done differently. In that season, they loved me well. They loved me as far as I would let them. The reality is I built walls.
How did you get into this situation in college? How did you is it something where you're living out a life that you never got to live out at home? Where did you,
I think that was always in me.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I think that there was always a rebellious streak that existed in me because of the constant, when you're shoved into the light for so blindingly long, there is something really enticing about living in the dark. You know what I mean? And so
I went to Hollywood.
Okay. So here, you understand this on some levels then. There's always been a rebellious streak in me, for sure. At some point, I got so tired of being the person that I felt like everyone needed me to be, that I started pushing back against that. If people need me to be perfect, then I'll show them how messed up I am, and I'll live in the shadows for a little bit, and I'll push the boundaries. And, the reality is neither one of those spaces is healthy or helpful for us, and where I sit now, yeah, it's a good question. It's one that, looking back, when I entered into that relationship, I had no idea that this man was going to be like this. He was a prominent figure on campus. His family held a lot of clout in that area. He worked for the school. All the girls wanted to date him. He was talented. He was also a pastor's kid. He played sports and he played drums, and he just kind of this full package deal. And all the girls wanted to be with him. And so I was like, what is so great about this guy? I need to know. But I think early on in the relationship, I started to see red flags, but there was a part of me that was like, I got to know for myself that this is the wrong choice. I'm not going to let anybody tell me.
What were some of the red flags? And I'm asking these questions because we have people listening right now, and we never go here, and I'm trying to go here.
Yeah. So, well, for starters, he never courted me, right? He never treated me with the level of respect that I would want for my daughter. He never came and picked me up from my apartment. I always drove to him and drove myself home. Rarely did we go out on dates. Like, it was just kind of a, let's meet at my apartment and we'll chill here. Or, and to be honest, when you get really far into a relationship, that's one thing. But at the very beginning, there should be a level of courting, in my opinion. I think that he should have taken me on dates, and he should have shown me that I was important and that I was worth, carving time out, intentional time. And that never really happened. And I think But here's the weird dichotomy. I was like, but I got the guy that everybody wants. So surely I'm missing something. Like there's something I'm missing about him. He's still great. Like he's got to be great because everybody wants him and I got him, but the reality was his facade on the outside was really great. And what was happening on the inside and the person that he was really not great. And I didn't really recognize those things until we were, a considerable amount of time had passed in our relationship. And so the red flags, one of them was that I only ever felt like he paid attention to me when we were alone behind closed doors. And to be honest, that's where the sexual trauma, that root started to take place, because I only felt like he noticed me behind closed doors, there and in public, he hardly acknowledged my existence. He never held my hand in public. He never opened the car door for me. It almost felt like there was some level of, I asked myself, is he ashamed of me? Does he not want people to know that we're together? And so I craved this love I wasn't getting from him publicly. And the only time he'd ever show it to me was when we were alone, in a bedroom. And I think I started to find validation there. And I was like, well, maybe if he falls in love with me here, it will kind of translate to the outside world. And eventually the public display of our relationship will catch up. And the reality is it never did, and that should have been a huge red flag to me. And I think somewhere deep down in my soul, it was. I just ignored it. I ignored it. And he didn't treat me well, I was at my lowest weight in college because he made it clear, that there was a body type that was the most attractive to him. And I was like, okay, I can be that, and I changed the way that I dressed because it was very clear this is how he wants me to dress. And if this is what he wants for me, then I can make that change. Okay. And again, I mentioned this earlier, it's making small concessions, steadily over a period of time before you know it, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm looking in the mirror and I don't recognize me anymore. This is not who I was, but it was almost too late. And I was in a worship band on campus too, and people figured out that I could sing. And so there were a lot of eyes on me too. And then when we started dating, it was like we were the couple on campus and everyone was watching us and thought that we were perfect and that we were this force, and everyone wanted to, support us. And it was, so there became this level of, oh my gosh, we have to live up to what people think we are, and I felt this feeling of trappedness. I just was like, oh my gosh, I'm in so deep now. Everybody thinks we're this perfect couple and they have no idea what is going on behind closed doors. And so to your point, I don't know how deep to go here, but the red flags are if you are with a person who is asking you to change things about yourself, it's not you who needs to be different. It's that person. You need to recognize that if someone's making you feel less than, that is not a right relationship. Get out. Get out before it's too late. Because for me, it became too late. I just, for me, find someone who loves you for you. Don't change yourself for someone else. Don't live up to the expectations of what another boy or another man is telling you that he wants from you or he needs from you. Mm-hmm. That's not the kind of love that Christ has for the church. That's not the kind of love that a man has for his wife. That's, it's wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think it just happened so slowly, for me. It was such a slow fade that by the time I started to not recognize myself in the mirror, I was like, well, it's too late to get out now. We're in this for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. Thank goodness you didn't have kids with this guy.
Oh my goodness. Can you imagine?
Because that's the reason a lot of folks keep it together.
That's right. For the kids. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was by the grace of God alone that we were 2 months out from our wedding.
Really?
When I called it off. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
2 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was, everything was done for the wedding.
Wow.
So, and
you were holding all this in because nobody.
Holding all of it
so
in.
what did you tell everybody what did you tell them you were canceling the wedding?
When I told my parents that some things were going on in our relationship and that we were fighting a lot and that I was scared. I was very careful about how far I let them in, but I did tell them one weekend that I was scared and then I felt like I wasn't ready. My mom was like, Kelsey, oh, this was such a poignant moment in time. She said, Kelsey, there is no amount of money or time or effort that has been spent on this wedding that is worth you getting married if you're not ready. So we can postpone it. Lots of people do that. She just kind of normalized it for me. She took the pressure off by telling me, baby, you don't have to do this. No one's making you do this. If you're not ready, we can hit the pause button. And the reality is that my mom and dad at that time were praying that God would systematically break down this relationship because they saw red flags all along the way. And they tried to talk to me about it, but I was like, walls up, this is what I'm doing, because in my mind, I felt so trapped. It was like, I can't, there is no way out. I have to do this now, and when my mom told me you can postpone the wedding and it doesn't, if you're not ready, baby, we don't have to do this. And it was like 3 days later that I broke up with him and gave the ring back. And to be honest, the rest of my time at school was a whirlwind. My mom handled that for me. Like she handled canceling everything. She was like, I don't want you to worry about a thing. I just want you to worry about finishing your degree and coming home and let's try to pick up the pieces of your life.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. That is so awesome. Well, I really appreciate you sharing this with us. And let me just ask you, for somebody that, first of all, I would encourage people to get your audiobook because it's you. Yeah. It's one thing to read it. It's another thing to listen to your story. And you did a great job on that. What do you hope to accomplish with this book? And because there's somebody listening right now who is, look, they've heard it all. This book is going to do this book is going to do that. But I think you have something really special here. And for that one person listening to this right now who maybe is in that same situation you were, a decade ago or so, what do you hope to accomplish? Man,
I have always said, because this book process has been about a 3-year journey. And at the very beginning of it, I said, and I still hold myself to this, if this book can make one girl somewhere know that she is worthy of more, then it's worth it. If there is a girl listening to this who is in a relationship where she feels like she's conceding to everything that person needs her to be, man, my hope is that you would realize you are made for more. That you are worthy to be loved better than that. And you need to get out. Whatever it takes, you need to get out. And if my book can empower someone to know their worth, it's all worth it. It's all worth it for me.
Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for coming by the homestead. This has been great. And I want to have you back. I love to, maybe on a regular basis. I know there are a lot of stories that need to be shared. And I think that, I run into people all the time that want to share their story. They just need a safe place to do so. And I really appreciate you coming by.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such an honor. I really appreciate it. I hope it helps somebody.
Well, I'm so grateful for you, Kelsey, for coming on to CIA, and thank you for sharing your story, for getting raw, for getting real for us, because, folks, stories matter. Your story matters. And when you share a story like this, it really helps others to get through whatever it is that they're working through, despite how difficult it may be. And I want to encourage you to share your story to help someone else who may be out there right now going through something very similar. So, I want to encourage you to just go onto our podcast website at contagiousinfluencers.com, and you can see a whole list of podcasts of things that might help you, that might speak to you, it might speak to your heart at a time that you need it most. There's some, I don't know, there's like 140 episodes there. So check that out at the contagiosinfluencers.com. And of course, if you want to listen to our radio show, we're on some 300 radio stations across the country. That's called Keep the Faith. And you can check that out also at keepthefaith.com. We've got a lot of great things there for you to check out, okay? This has been David Sams, and this has been CIA, Contagious Influencers of America, the podcast from the producers of Keep the Faith. Please do rate and review us, because that's how others find out about us, and that's how we create a ripple effect of love across the country, across the world. Well, we'll be back here in just a few days, but until then, remember to go out there and live that life in living color, because it sure is a heck of a lot more interesting than living in black and white. We'll see you next time.